The desert sun burned hot over Eagle Pass, Texas, when Violet Zimmerman stumbled into town with nothing but the torn dress on her back and bruises blooming purple across her ribs where her husband's fists had landed for the last time. She had walked 3 days through mesquite and rattlesnake country to escape the ranch where Marcus had kept her like a prisoner. And now in this dusty border town in the summer of 1882, she wanted nothing more than to disappear into the crowd and never let another man lay hands on her again. The saloon was the only place hiring, and Violet swallowed her pride as she pushed through the swinging doors into the dim interior where cigar smoke hung thick as morning fog. The owner, a heavy-set woman named Lucinda with rouge on her cheeks and shrewd eyes, looked her up and down and nodded once. "You can serve drinks," Lucinda said. "Keep your wits about you and don't let the men get too familiar. You look like you have been through enough already." Violet's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. She nodded and accepted the clean dress Lucinda handed her, disappearing into the back room to change. The fabric was simple cotton, blue as a summer sky, and when she emerged, several of the afternoon drinkers turned to look. She kept her eyes down and moved behind the bar, learning where the whiskey bottles were kept and how to pour without spilling. The work was hard but honest. Violet learned quickly which men to avoid and which ones would tip well if she smiled politely and kept their glasses full. She saved every penny Lucinda paid her, hiding the coins in a tin box under her bed in the cramped room she rented above the general store. 3 weeks passed, then 4, and Violet began to think she might actually build something resembling a life here in Eagle Pass. That was when Franklin Colter rode into town. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of good bourbon. He wore his gun low on his hip like he knew how to use it, but there was something different about him. Something in the way he removed his hat when he entered the saloon and said, "Madam," to Lucinda like he meant it. He took a table in the corner and ordered whiskey, and when Violet brought it to him, their eyes met for just a moment. She saw him register the fading bruise on her cheekbone, the one she had tried to cover with powder that morning. His expression shifted, something dark and angry flashing across his features before he schooled them back to neutral. "Thank you," he said quietly. Violet nodded and hurried away, her heart pounding for reasons she could not name. She told herself it was fear, that old familiar companion, but somewhere deep inside she knew it was something else entirely. Franklin came back the next day, and the day after that. He always sat at the same corner table, always ordered whiskey, and always treated Violet with a careful courtesy that made her suspicious. Men did not act this way without wanting something, she had learned. They smiled and spoke sweetly until they got you alone, and then the masks came off and the real violence began. On the 4th day, a drunk cowboy named Pete grabbed Violet's wrist as she passed his table. His fingers dug into her skin hard enough to hurt, and she froze, the old panic rising in her throat like bile. "Give us a kiss, darling," Pete slurred, yanking her closer. "Let go," Violet said, her voice barely above a whisper. Pete laughed and pulled harder. Violet's free hand went to the knife she kept tucked in her dress pocket, the one she had stolen from Marcus's kitchen before she ran. But before she could draw it, Franklin was there, his hand clamped on Pete's shoulder. "The lady asked you to let go," Franklin said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was steel underneath it. Pete looked up, his eyes unfocused. "Mind your own business, stranger. I am making it my business." Franklin's grip tightened until Pete winced. "Let her go. Now." Something in Franklin's tone must have penetrated Pete's whiskey-soaked brain, because he released Violet's wrist with a curse and shoved back from the table. Franklin did not move, did not even reach for his gun, but Pete took one look at his face and decided to leave the saloon entirely, muttering under his breath about outsiders and their manners. Violet rubbed her wrist, staring at Franklin. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar that curved along his jaw. He was perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22 years. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I did not need your help," Violet said, hating how her voice shook. "I know." Franklin took a step back, giving her space. "But I gave it anyway. I hope that is acceptable." Violet did not know what to say to that. She nodded once and fled back behind the bar, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. That night, as Violet locked up the saloon after closing, she found Franklin waiting outside in the darkness. She stopped short, her hand going instinctively to her knife. "I mean you no harm," Franklin said, holding his hands up where she could see them. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safely." "I've been getting home safely for weeks without your help," Violet said sharply. "I am sure you have." Franklin smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. "Call me overprotective. It is a failing of mine. I do not need protection." "Everyone needs protection sometimes." Franklin fell into step beside her as she started walking, keeping a careful distance between them. Even people who are good at protecting themselves. Violet stopped walking and turned to face him. The street was empty except for the two of them, lit only by the pale glow of the moon. "What do you want from me?" Franklin looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Nothing. Men always want something, not always." He met her eyes steadily. "Some men just want to help." Violet laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Help, that is what they all say at first." Something in her tone made Franklin go very still. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "Who hurt you?" The question caught Violet off guard. She opened her mouth to deny it, to tell him to mind his own business, but what came out instead was the truth. "My husband," she whispered. "All men hurt me eventually. It is just what they do." Franklin took a step back, deliberately putting more space between them. His hands hung loose at his sides, non-threatening, open. "Then let me prove you wrong," he said quietly. Violet stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception, for the crack in the mask that would reveal the monster underneath. But all she saw was sincerity and something that looked almost like pain. "Why?" she asked. "Because you deserve better." Franklin's voice was steady. "Because every person deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. And because I know what it is like to be hurt by someone who was supposed to care for you." Violet felt something shift inside her chest, some long frozen thing beginning to thaw. She did not trust it, did not trust him, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to. "Good night, Mr. Colter," she said finally. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman." Franklin tipped his hat to her and turned to walk away. He made it 3 steps before Violet spoke again. "You can walk me home," she said, "if you want to." Franklin looked back at her, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "I would like that very much." They walked through the quiet streets of Eagle Pass, not touching, barely speaking, but something passed between them in the silence. When they reached the general store, Violet climbed the outside stairs to her room and Franklin waited below until she had the door unlocked. "Will you be at the saloon tomorrow?" he called up softly. "I work every day," Violet said. "Then I will see you tomorrow." Violet watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street, and wondered what she was doing. Men were dangerous. Men hurt and took and destroyed. She had learned that lesson well, paid for it in blood and bruises and nights spent crying into her pillow while Marcus snored beside her. But Franklin Colter had stepped back when she told him about her pain. He had given her space when she asked for it. And maybe, just maybe, he was different. The next morning, Violet woke to find a package outside her door. Inside was a new shawl, soft cream-colored wool that would be perfect for the cooler evenings, and a note written in careful script. I noticed you did not have one. No obligation attached. FC Violet held the shawl against her chest and allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it might be like to trust someone again. Franklin kept his word. He came to the saloon every day, always polite, always respectful. He never tried to touch Violet, never pressed her for information about her past, never demanded anything from her at all. He simply existed in her orbit, steady as the North Star, and gradually Violet found herself looking forward to seeing him. 2 weeks after the incident with Pete, Franklin asked if he could buy Violet dinner. Not at the saloon, he clarified quickly, but at the restaurant down the street. A proper meal with real plates and silverware. Violet's first instinct was to refuse. But she looked at Franklin's hopeful expression and heard herself say yes before she could think better of it. The restaurant was small and clean, run by a Mexican family who served the best tamales Violet had ever tasted. Franklin ordered for both of them in surprisingly good Spanish, and the owner's wife beamed at him like he was a favorite son. "You speak Spanish," Violet observed. "My mother was from Sonora," Franklin said. "She made sure I grew up speaking both languages." Was. Franklin's expression grew sad. "She died when I was 16, cholera. I am sorry." Violet meant it. She knew what it was like to lose someone, even if the circumstances were different. "Thank you." Franklin took a sip of his water. "My father took it hard. He was never quite the same after she was gone." "What about you?" Violet asked. "Were you the same?" Franklin considered the question seriously. "No, losing her taught me that life is short and people are fragile. It taught me to value kindness, because my mother was the kindest person I ever knew, and when she died, the world became a darker place." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "That is a good lesson to learn." "What about you?" Franklin asked gently. "Do you have family?" Violet shook her head. "My parents died when I was young, fever. I was raised by my aunt, but she passed 3 years ago. That was when I met Marcus." She had not meant to say his name, but once it was out, she could not take it back. Franklin's expression darkened. "Your husband." "My late husband." Violet lifted her chin defiantly. "I do not know if he is actually dead, but he is dead to me. I will never go back to him." "Good," Franklin said fiercely. "A man who raises his hand to a woman is no man at all. He is a coward and a bully, and you deserve so much better." The conviction in his voice made Violet's chest ache. "How can you be so sure? You barely know me." "I know enough." Franklin reached across the table like he wanted to take her hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "I know you are brave, because you left a dangerous situation and built a new life for yourself. I know you are strong, because you survived things that would have broken a lesser person. And I know you are kind, because I see how you treat the other people in the saloon, how you look out for the younger girls and make sure they do not get into trouble." Violet had not realized he noticed those things. She swallowed hard. "You see a lot. I pay attention to things that matter." Franklin smiled. "And you matter, Violet, whether you believe it or not." No one had told Violet she mattered in longer than she could remember. The words settled into her heart like seeds in fertile soil, fragile but full of potential. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and when Franklin walked Violet home, she let him climb the stairs with her. At her door, she turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. "For coffee, I mean, just coffee." Franklin's eyes searched her face. "Are you sure?" "No." Violet laughed shakily. "But I want you to anyway." Inside her small room, Violet lit the lamp and put water on to boil while Franklin looked around with interest. There was not much to see, just a narrow bed, a chair, a small table, and the trunk that held all her worldly possessions. But Violet had made it as comfortable as she could, with curtains she had sewn herself and a rag rug on the floor. "It is a good space," Franklin said. "Feels like home." "It is the first place that has felt like home in a long time," Violet admitted. She poured the coffee and handed Franklin a cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The touch sent electricity up her arm, and she pulled back quickly. Franklin noticed. He set his cup down carefully. "I should probably go. I do not want to make you uncomfortable." "You do make me uncomfortable," Violet said honestly, "but not in the way you think. You make me uncomfortable because you make me want things I cannot have." "What things?" Violet took a deep breath. "Safety, trust. Someone who will not hurt me." Franklin stood very still. "I would never hurt you, Violet. I swear it on my mother's memory." "You say that now." Violet's voice broke. "But Marcus said things like that too in the beginning. He was charming and kind, and he made me feel special. And then we got married and everything changed. He drank too much and gambled away our money, and when I tried to protest, he hit me. The first time he apologized. He cried and said he would never do it again. But he did. Again and again, until I stopped counting the bruises and started planning my escape." Franklin's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I am not Marcus." "How do I know that?" Violet demanded. "How do I know you will not change once you have me, once I let myself depend on you?" "You do not," Franklin said simply. "That is the terrible truth, Violet. You cannot know for certain. All you can do is look at my actions and decide whether you want to take a chance. I can stand here and promise you 1,000 times that I will never raise my hand to you, that I will treat you with respect and kindness every day for the rest of my life. But words are just air. It is what I do that matters." Violet stared at him, this man who had somehow worked his way past her defenses without her even realizing it. "What if I cannot take that chance? What if I am too broken?" Franklin shook his head. "You are not broken. You are wounded, and that is different. Wounds can heal given time and care. And I have all the time in the world, Violet. I am not going anywhere." Something in Violet's chest cracked open, and before she knew what she was doing, she was crying. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, months and years of pain pouring out all at once. Franklin did not try to touch her, did not crowd her space. He simply stood there, steady and solid, until the storm passed. When Violet finally caught her breath, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am sorry. Do not apologize." Franklin's voice was rough with emotion. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Violet looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes. He meant every word he said. He would wait as long as it took for her to heal, asking nothing in return. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. Franklin smiled. "Every day, if you will let me." "Every day," Violet agreed. True to his word, Franklin came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He brought Violet small gifts, nothing expensive or elaborate, just thoughtful things that showed he was paying attention. A book of poetry when he heard her mention she liked to read. A hair ribbon in blue that matched her dress. Fresh peaches from the market because she had said once they were her favorite fruit. Violet began to relax around him, to let down the walls she had built so carefully. Franklin told her about his life, about growing up on a ranch in New Mexico territory and learning to break horses from his father. About the brother he had lost to bandits when Franklin was 19, and how that loss had led him to become a lawman for a while, trying to make the world a little safer. "Why did you stop?" Violet asked one evening as they sat on the stairs outside her room, watching the sun set over Eagle Pass. Franklin was quiet for a long moment. I realized I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was angry all the time, looking for revenge instead of justice. It was turning me into someone I did not recognize, someone my mother would not have been proud of. So I hung up my badge and started drifting, trying to figure out who I wanted to be. "And who is that?" Violet asked softly. Franklin looked at her, his eyes warm in the fading light. "Someone worthy of you." Violet's breath caught. "Franklin." "I am falling in love with you," Franklin said. "I have been falling in love with you since the first day I saw you in that saloon, and I know it is too soon, and I know you are not ready, and that is fine. I just needed you to know. You do not have to say anything back. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted to be honest." Violet felt like the earth had shifted under her feet. "I do not know how to love anyone anymore," she whispered. "Marcus took that from me. He did not take anything." Franklin reached out slowly, giving Violet plenty of time to pull away, and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip careful. "He tried to destroy it, but it is still there. I can see it in how you care for the girls at the saloon, in how you tip extra when you buy something from old Mr. Henderson at the general store, because you know he is struggling. You have so much love in you, Violet. You have just been too scared to let it out." Violet looked down at their joined hands. She waited for the panic to come, for the old fear to rise up and choke her. But all she felt was warmth spreading through her chest, thawing the frozen places inside her. "I am still scared," she admitted. "That is all right." Franklin squeezed her hand gently. "Being scared does not mean you cannot be brave." They sat there as the stars came out, hand in hand, not speaking, just existing together in the peaceful quiet. And for the first time since she had run from Marcus, Violet allowed herself to imagine a future that did not revolve around fear and survival. The summer heat gave way to autumn, and with it came change. Violet continued working at the saloon, but Franklin found work too, helping out at the livery stable and doing odd jobs around town. He was good with horses, patient and kind, and people began to trust him. He never mentioned his past as a lawman unless asked directly, and even then he downplayed it, saying only that he had worn a badge for a while but preferred civilian life. On a crisp October evening, Franklin took Violet on a picnic outside of town. They rode double on his horse, a steady gray mare named Silver, to a spot along the Rio Grande where cottonwood trees grew thick and the water ran clear and cold. Franklin had packed bread and cheese and apples, and they ate sitting on a blanket while the river murmured beside them. "I have been thinking," Franklin said as they finished eating, "about the future." Violet's heart began to pound. "What about it?" "I want to buy some land," Franklin said. "Maybe start a horse ranch, something small to begin with. I have been saving my money and I have enough for a down payment. It would be hard work, but it would be ours. Mine, I mean." He stumbled over the words, and Violet realized he was nervous. The knowledge made her feel tender toward him. "That sounds like a good plan," she said carefully. Franklin took a deep breath. "I want you to come with me, Violet. Not right away, not until you are ready. But someday. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "Franklin, You do not have to answer now," Franklin said quickly. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know what I am hoping for. What I am working toward." Violet thought about everything Franklin had given her over the past months. His patience, his kindness, his unwavering respect. He had kept every promise he had made to her. He had proven, over and over again, that he was nothing like Marcus. "I am ready," she said. Franklin blinked. "Ready for what? For this?" Violet leaned forward and kissed him. It was just a brief press of lips, chaste and sweet, but it felt like coming home. Franklin made a soft sound of surprise, and then his hands came up to cup her face. so gentle it made her want to cry. When they pulled apart, he was looking at her with such wonder that Violet had to laugh. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No." Violet smiled through her tears. "But I want to try anyway. I want to believe that love does not have to hurt, that I can trust you with my heart and you will keep it safe." "I will," Franklin promised. "With my life, Violet, I swear it." They kissed again, longer this time, learning the shape and taste of each other. Franklin's hands stayed on her face, never wandering, never demanding more than she was willing to give. And when Violet finally pulled back, breathless and giddy, she felt lighter than she had in years. "I love you," she said, testing out the words. They felt foreign on her tongue, but also right. "I think I have loved you for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it." Franklin's smile was brilliant. "Say it again." "I love you, Franklin Colter." "I love you too, Violet Zimmerman." Franklin stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. "I love you, and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They rode back to Eagle Pass as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Violet sat in front of Franklin on the saddle, his arms around her waist, and felt safe in a way she never had before. Not just physically safe, though that was part of it, but emotionally safe. Like she could be vulnerable and weak and broken, and Franklin would still love her, would still choose her, over and over again. Word spread quickly through the small town that Franklin and Violet were courting. Lucinda gave Violet a rare hug and told her she deserved happiness. Old Mr. Henderson at the general store winked at Franklin and said it was about time. Someone put a smile on Violet's face. Even the local priest, Father Miguel, stopped Franklin on the street to tell him that Violet was a fine woman and he had better treat her right. "On my honor, Father," Franklin said solemnly. Winter came to Eagle Pass, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Franklin spent every free moment with Violet and she with him. They walked along the Rio Grande, talking about everything and nothing. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the wooden pews. They had dinner with the families Franklin had befriended through his work, and Violet marveled at how easily he fit into community life, how people seemed drawn to his quiet strength and genuine kindness. On Christmas Eve, Franklin gave Violet a ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a small garnet set in it, but to Violet it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Marry me," Franklin said. They were standing outside her room, snow beginning to fall softly around them. "I know it has not been very long, and if you want to wait longer we can. But I know what I want, Violet. I want you. I want to build that ranch and fill it with horses and maybe someday children if you want them. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to be your husband if you will let me, if you trust me enough." Violet looked at the ring, then at Franklin's face. She saw love there, pure and simple and true. She saw the man who had stepped back when she told him she had been hurt, the man who had kept his promise to prove her wrong day after day after day. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Franklin slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, long and deep, and Violet kissed him back with all the love she had been too afraid to show for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "You already do," Violet said. They were married in early February of 1883 in the small Catholic church in Eagle Pass with Father Miguel officiating. Lucinda stood up as Violet's witness, and a rancher named Tom who Franklin had befriended stood up as his. Violet wore a new dress, cream-colored with lace at the collar, and Franklin wore his best suit. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Violet like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Violet finally understood what it meant to be cherished. The town threw them a party at the saloon, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Violet danced with Franklin until her feet hurt, laughing as he spun her around the floor. She danced with old Mr. Henderson and with Tom, and even with Father Miguel, who turned out to be surprisingly light on his feet. And when the party finally wound down in the early hours of the morning, Franklin carried Violet across the threshold of the small house they had rented on the edge of town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Colter," he said. Violet smiled against his neck. "I like the sound of that." That night, Franklin made love to Violet with a tenderness that made her cry. He went slowly, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable and ready. And when it was over and they lay tangled together in the sheets, Violet felt whole in a way she never had before. Like all the broken pieces of her had finally been put back together, stronger for having been shattered. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Franklin whispered back. "Always." The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Franklin worked hard to save money for the ranch, and Violet continued working at the saloon, though she cut back her hours. They spent their evenings planning their future, looking at parcels of land and discussing what kind of horses they wanted to raise. Franklin wanted to focus on breeding working horses, sturdy animals that could handle the harsh Texas climate. Violet wanted to include some gentler mares suitable for women and children to ride. "We can do both," Franklin said, kissing the top of her head. "We can do anything we want." In May, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She told Franklin that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide and then he whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down carefully. "Are you happy?" he asked anxiously. "I know we did not plan this so soon." "I am terrified," Violet admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I want this baby, Franklin. I want to build a family with you." Franklin knelt down and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I love you already, and I promise I am going to be the best father I can be. I am going to protect you and teach you and make sure you know every single day how loved you are." Violet ran her fingers through Franklin's hair, her heart so full it ached. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and warm and right. By July, they had saved enough for the down payment on a small parcel of land about 5 miles outside Eagle Pass. It was not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needed work, but it was theirs. Franklin threw himself into fixing up the cabin, working from dawn until dusk to make it livable before the baby came. He repaired the roof and the walls, built a new porch, and even made a rocking chair for Violet to sit in while she nursed the baby. Violet helped as much as she could, but as her pregnancy progressed, Franklin became increasingly protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work for too long in the heat. When she protested that she was perfectly capable, he would kiss her and say he knew that, but he wanted to take care of her anyway. "You have spent so long taking care of yourself," he said. "Let me do it for a while." So Violet let him and found she did not mind. It felt good to be cared for, to know that someone was looking out for her well-being not because they wanted to control her, but because they genuinely loved her. Their first horse arrived in August, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze that Franklin won in a card game. He did not gamble often, but when he heard the previous owner was mistreating the animal, he had sat down at the table determined to win her freedom. The mare was skittish and nervous when they brought her to the ranch, but Franklin worked with her patiently, using gentle touches and soft words until she began to trust him. "She is like you," Violet observed one evening as she watched Franklin brush the mare. "Scared but strong. Just needs someone to be patient with her." Franklin smiled. "I suppose we are all a little broken, looking for someone to help us heal." By September, the cabin was finished and they moved in officially, leaving behind the small house in town. Violet loved the ranch immediately. She loved waking up to the sound of birds instead of drunken shouts from the saloon. She loved sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over their land. She loved knowing that this place was theirs, that no one could take it from them. Franklin bought 2 more horses in October, a pair of young geldings he planned to train as working animals. He spent hours with them each day, teaching them to respond to voice commands and leg cues. Violet loved watching him work, loved the gentle competence with which he handled the animals. He would make such a good father, she thought, patient and kind and willing to put in the work. The baby came in early February of 1884, on a cold night when the wind howled outside the cabin. Violet's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was certain she could not go on. But Franklin was there beside her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth, and telling her how brave she was, how strong. When the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in Violet's arms, she looked down into a tiny red face and felt her heart expand impossibly larger. "It is a boy," the midwife announced. Franklin laughed through his tears. "A son. We have a son, Violet." They named him Daniel, after Franklin's brother. Little Daniel had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he owned both their hearts completely. Franklin was as devoted a father as Violet had known he would be. He woke up for the nighttime feedings even though Violet was the one nursing, just to keep her company and change Daniel's diaper. He sang lullabies in Spanish that he remembered from his childhood, his deep voice gentle and soothing. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk so there was no chance of splinters. Watching Franklin with their son, Violet felt the last of her fear finally dissolve. This was what family was supposed to be. Not violence and control, but love and partnership and mutual respect. The ranch grew slowly over the next few years. By the time Daniel was 2, they had a small herd of horses and a growing reputation for quality animals. Franklin's skill as a trainer became well known in the area, and people came from as far as San Antonio to buy horses from the Colter ranch. Violet discovered she had a knack for the business side of things. She kept meticulous records of their finances and breeding lines, and she had a sharp eye for which horses would command the best prices. Together, she and Franklin made a formidable team. In the spring of 1886, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. Daniel was 3 now, a rambunctious little boy who followed his father everywhere and peppered everyone with endless questions. When they told him he was going to be a big brother, he looked thoughtful and then asked if the baby would be able to play with him right away. "Not right away," Franklin explained, laughing. "Babies are very small at first, but eventually, yes, you will be able to play together." "Good," Daniel said decisively. "I will teach the baby everything I know." The second baby, a girl they named Grace, was born in December. She was smaller than Daniel had been, with wisps of blonde hair and a serious expression. Daniel was fascinated by her, wanting to help with everything from bathing her to choosing her clothes. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the horses thrived, and Violet and Franklin's love deepened with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were droughts that made water scarce and winters that were harder than expected. There were sick horses and financial worries, and all the normal struggles of running a ranch and raising a family. But through it all, Franklin kept his promise. He never raised his voice in anger. He never lifted his hand except in gentleness. He treated Violet with respect and kindness, even during their rare arguments. And slowly, year by year, he proved to her that not all men hurt. That love could be safe and good and healing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Violet to the spot along the Rio Grande where he had proposed all those years ago. The children were staying with Lucinda in town for the night, giving them a rare evening alone. "You remember what you said to me the first time we really talked?" Franklin asked as they sat on the same blanket, watching the same river flow by. "I said a lot of things," Violet replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. "You said all men hurt you." Franklin took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. "Do you still believe that?" Violet looked at him, this man who had kept every promise, who had loved her faithfully through good times and bad, who had given her a life she never dreamed possible. "No," she said softly. "You proved me wrong." Franklin smiled and kissed her, sweet and slow. "That was always the plan." They made love under the stars that night, and it was as passionate and tender as their first time, maybe even more so because of everything they had been through together. When it was over and they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Violet thought about the scared, broken woman she had been when she stumbled into Eagle Pass all those years ago. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who had learned that love did not have to hurt. That trust could be rebuilt, that happy endings were possible, even for people with terrible pasts. The years continued to pass. Daniel grew into a fine young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. Grace became a skilled horsewoman, riding before she could barely walk. In 1892, Violet gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Rose. The cabin had to be expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch expanded too, growing to over 200 acres. Franklin's hair began to show gray at the temples, and lines deepened around Violet's eyes, but they both agreed they had never been happier. They had built something real and lasting, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the horses were settled in the barn, Franklin and Violet would sit on the porch together, hand in hand, watching the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked, sharing the small details of their days. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content just to be together. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not come to Eagle Pass?" Franklin asked one evening. Violet considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that everything I went through led me here to you, to this life, and I would not change that for anything. Even the hard parts, even those." Violet squeezed his hand. "They made me who I am. They taught me what real love looks like because I had experienced the opposite." Franklin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are the bravest person I know." "No," Violet said. "I am just someone who was lucky enough to meet a man who kept his promises." As the stars came out overhead, Violet thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain and fear, yes, but also the healing and hope. The slow rebuilding of trust. The discovery that love could be gentle, that a man's hands could hold without hurting, that marriage could be a partnership built on respect and care. Franklin had proven her wrong about men, but more than that, he had proven to her that she was worthy of love. That her past did not define her future. That broken things could be mended, and sometimes they were even more beautiful for having been broken. Their children grew and eventually began families of their own. Daniel married a schoolteacher from Eagle Pass and took over the day-to-day running of the ranch. Grace married a young lawyer and moved to San Antonio, though she visited often. The twins, Samuel and Rose, both showed aptitude for horse training and stayed on the ranch, working alongside their father and older brother. By the time Franklin and Violet celebrated their 30th anniversary, the Colter Ranch was one of the most successful in South Texas. But more important than the success was the family they had built, the love that had grown and multiplied through 3 generations. On a warm spring evening in 1913, as Violet sat on the porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard, she reflected on the life she had lived. She was 63 years old now, her hair more silver than blonde, her hands weathered from years of work. But she was content in a way her younger self never could have imagined. Franklin came out and sat beside her, moving a little slower these days but still strong, still steady. He took her hand, as he had done thousands of times over the years, and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Violet said. "The whole long, strange, wonderful journey. How I thought my life was over when I ran from Marcus and how it turned out to be just beginning." "Best decision you ever made, running," Franklin said. "Second best," Violet corrected. "The best was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." Franklin laughed and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Violet Colter, today, tomorrow, and for all the days after that." "I love you too," Violet said, leaning into his warmth. "Thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for letting me try." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. The ranch, the horses, the children and grandchildren. But most of all, the love that had started with a scared woman's whispered confession and a cowboy's simple promise. All men had hurt Violet until one man stepped back and proved her wrong. And in doing so, he had given her everything she never knew she needed: safety, trust, a love that healed instead of harmed, a family, a home, a future bright with possibility. As darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, Violet closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet Texas air. She was home. She was loved. She was finally and completely at peace. And it was more than enough. It was everything.